exaltation of words. Musically, Milad hymns evoke feelings of both devotion and exaltation through their melodic simplicity, which you will hear, and upward surge. There is a way for the melody to go up to get a sense of exaltation. Participating in a Milad conveys an experience of veneration and submission before the most exalted personage in Islam and a deep affection for his humanity. The second assembly that we will now come to is the Sufi assembly, also called Sama. Sama means, it's Arabic, and it means, and I'm certainly not pronouncing it correctly, Larry Shaven will have to teach me, it means listening. So you can see the emphasis is not on the music, it is on what you hear and how you hear it. And therein lies the central rule about Sufi music, and that is you must approach it with the appropriate attitude. An attitude that Zohra Hosseini has beautifully expressed already. The musical form is called Qawwali. It employs mystical poetry as an essential means to reach that state of cognition as well as emotional experience. It's a combination of the heart and the mind, which people also call ecstasy. They call it hal, they call it vajd. It's whether we could say it's a communion with God, it's a feeling of being near God. Many different words are used because it's an individual experience. It has to happen to you individually. For this purpose, musical delivery of Sufi poems is improvisational, responding to the listener's individual spiritual needs of the moment. Musicians are highly trained not only in a repertoire of poetry and music, but they also are trained to understand the process and to look. They're very sharp-eyed. Sufi musicians have told me the greatest thing that you need to have is an eagle's eye, so that you can see what and understand what the spiritual development of your listeners is and how you can support it in an appropriate way. A strong rhythm of drum beats and clapping. Besides, by the way, we will afterwards present to you a mini version of this music, so that you will see a little bit of my video recordings, but we will also try to create a live experience for this. So a strong rhythm of drum beats and clapping articulates the incessant repetition of God's name in what is in Arabic called dhikr or zikr. So that beat is in fact a repetition of God's name. It isn't a beat to do anything else to or to feel and think anything else to. But the use of instrumental accompaniment, the drum, the dhola, which you see, the barrel drum right here, where is it? There it is. As well as the tabla over there. And the other instrument is the harmonium. These instruments are used in this tradition, and also an unorthodox emphasis on cultivating emotions as part of the religious experience. Both of these have always rendered Qawwali hymns religiously controversial, even among some Sufi orders who do not accept it. Qawwali performers are highly skilled hereditary professionals related to classical musicians. Sama is a most intimate spiritual experience among a brotherly circle of Sufi disciples. At the same time, it's also the most public and institutionalized of the recitational assemblies. Qawwali events are held throughout the year, both among exclusive spiritual groups anywhere they meet, and at shrines of Sufi saints before large public audiences. The principal occasion is the anniversary of the numerous Sufi saints, especially the great Chishti and Qadri founders of Indian Sufism, whom Dr. Husseini has already referred to. Basically, the event is a succession of powerful and moving hymns drawn from a diverse repertoire that includes venerable foundational poetry in classical Persian, and also poetry in Urdu, and finally, of course, poetry in classical devotional Hindi. So we have a trilingual tradition here with three kinds of musical strands going. Qawwali texts emphasize and evoke mystical love. They also extol the hierarchy of Sufi spiritual personages from a Sufi adept's personal spiritual guide, the Sheikh, to the past guides who have been, I'm saying, using here the word saint, really, that's not quite the correct word. Awliya simply means a person who had the privilege and the capacity to be nearer to God. So let's use the word saint also in quotation marks. So from sheikhs and saints to Hazrat Ali, who is the Prophet's son-in-law, and finally to Prophet Muhammad himself. We will be singing, our first Qawwali song will in fact be the foundational hymn that establishes that all Sufis are linked to this chain, this spiritual chain that comes from Prophet Muhammad to Ali, to Hazrat Ali, down, all the way down through a spiritual chain of saints to each of the individuals who are in the audience. Now, how does sound accomplish this? I would like now to go to examples. First of all, and also to the real events that I experienced. The first of these events that I'm talking about happened in Delhi. And this was 19 years ago, in 1975, when I spent a whole year researching and experiencing Sufi assemblies and Qawwali. And that became the foundation for the book I later on wrote. So here we are now in the shrine of the Saint Nizamuddin Aulia. It's in New Delhi, south of New Delhi, and if you ever go to Delhi and you have not done this, do make a small pilgrimage to that shrine. It's a wonderful place, it is beautiful, it's peaceful, it is also very much full of people. It's full of a great community, a shifting community of people who seek something there. And they are not all Muslims. There are Sikhs, there are Hindus, there are Christians, there are people from America, there are people from England. It doesn't matter who they are. Sufism is open. It allows you in. It doesn't ask questions. But what it does demand is, it demands adab. Adab is a very important concept in Muslim tradition. It means something like proper form, proper observance, respect, cultivation, culture, and all of that goes together with that emotion. It requires that control, or that sense of civilization is required to go together with the emotion that you will be allowing yourself to feel when you are in the presence of a saint and in the presence of this music. Now we are hearing a great Qawwali performer who has since died. His name, maybe the greatest in India, I feel, of the spiritual Qawwals. I'm not talking about entertainment here. I'm not talking about people who go on stage. I'm talking about people who strictly perform only in the service of religion. The name of this Qawwal was Aziz Ahmed Khan Varsi. He was from Hyderabad, and he belonged to the illustrious lineage of professional Qawwals who traced their descent to Amir Khusro, who was one of the founders of Sufism in India in the 13th century. All right. What you're hearing is a very short excerpt, and you will hear a continuous repetition of a particular passage. What you are hearing is, in fact, what they call takrar. Takrar means an incessant repetition, an insistent repetition. And this happens because the listener, some listeners, maybe just one listener, is at this point beginning to have received the full impact of the meaning of one phrase of this poem. And that phrase speaks to him in such a way that the performers must continue to say that phrase, sing it, speak it musically again and again and again, as long as that spiritual experience lasts. In fact, there is a rule about the performance of Qawwali. When a listener, and the listener is the important one, not the performer is a servant. When a Sufi listener is moved to that point where he loses himself, at that point, the performer is required to serve that state, to maintain, not to cut it off, not to move on to something else and sing something different or move on to the next verse. If he doesn't continue to repeat this same phrase or word, then the danger is that the Sufi who is in that state may die. And there are, in fact, a number of accounts from the hoary past of saints like Buddha-Buddin, you mentioned this one saint, who is the spiritual great-grandfather of Nizamuddin. He died while he was listening to Qawwali. And now if you think this is all right, that those are stories from the old days, let me tell you that in as recently as 1979, the same thing happened to a Sufi, a very venerable Sufi in Karachi in Pakistan. He died in Sama while he was in an ecstatic state. And the papers were full of that the next day, and there were a lot of accounts of his spiritual life and how this was a culmination of that life. So what we're hearing then is a Persian poem sung by this great Qawwal, and you'll notice the beat, you'll understand what it means, you understand what repetition means. The West has a very different understanding of repetition. We in the West grow up to look down on repetition. We think it's boring. We must have something new all the time. And we think we call repetition redundant. I also felt that. It is only when after sitting in Qawwali assemblies all night along with my suffering husband, without whom I could not have done this, because let's face it, Sufism is a completely male tradition. A woman may be a Sufi, but she cannot participate in any of this. I had the privilege to be allowed to do this work and to be present and to record, thanks to the fact that I was associated with a gentleman who had the credibility, the understanding, and the sensitivity, the cultural insight, and the devotion to his wife, that I was able to do this, that people would accept me as an oddball who was doing something that was nevertheless well-meaning. You know, they didn't just know why I was doing it, but they were willing to put up with me. So, all men. So I consider myself extremely fortunate that this was possible. Let's listen now. Too much talking. I see some musicians in the audience, and I know that they're just wondering about what this lecture is going to be. It's a praise of the vision of God. The worship of ecstasy. You hear it's just being repeated. Notice how it's a group, one leader. He's moving on to the next verse now. The ecstasy is over. And then repetition once again on the word Gajgulahe. Gajgulahe is a metaphor for the beauty of the vision, the inner vision of God. Time differs in this music. There's a different kind of time. We have suddenly enter at a different time. We have to come out of it now, otherwise we'll be here all night. Now, my second example is a video recording, and you have to appreciate This was handheld stuff, and we are not in studios, there was no light. What you are now going to see was recorded also at Nizamuddin Aulia with a video camera at that time in 1975, black and white. And we were looking in, we were participating just as onlookers with some other people on a very intimate gathering of Sufis with one leader, the Sheikh. There is always a responsible person, and you'll see why, because we are now going to witness something very special, which I only saw very, very, very rarely. And if you don't see, if you want to move over here to see better, I don't know if, how well you're going to see this. But this is really special. The light was terrible. There was 120-watt bulb in that room, and it was like 1 a.m. I was standing with my camera, and what you are seeing is straight ahead of you, you see the Sheikh, the leader of the spiritual leader of this group, and they're all like brothers. They're all like brother disciples. And you see one disciple is entering a state that was not a normal state of just sitting there and listening and feeling and understanding, but it is a state of being transported into a different vision. And you see how this happens. You see, watch carefully, what you're seeing is, number one, that when you are moved inwardly so much with your emotions, it becomes very difficult to just sit still. You are then allowed to let your body move in harmony with your emotions. But there is a very specific way of doing that, adab, remember, proper form. That specific way is beautifully seen here with this old man who rises. He rises in his